Welcome to Champagne Problems Podcast. I am your host, Robbie Shaw. Join us as we explore mental and emotional well-being, physical optimization, and the journey to discovering your highest self. Champagne Problems is brought to you in proud partnership with Bond Buzz, the alcohol-free social spirit. Laura King Edwards, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. We are busy people. We've had winter illnesses. It's been tough to get back in the studio, but I'm happy to be here.
So we are back in the studio, continuing our conversation. I think what occurred was we realized that there was much more to this, or at least I did, than I expected. And I did not want to do a disservice to the journey that has been your experience throughout, the loss of your sister, the birth of your son, your personal life, and everything that has kind of followed those events. So today, here's how I think would be a good way to start. I like the fact that off camera, just a few minutes ago, we were talking about life and how it is a series of building blocks and experiences that lead to how new experiences are experienced. And I think without diving right back into everything that you went through with your sister and her illness, let's go even further and talk about some of the building blocks that led to how that particular event was experienced.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Let's do it.
All right. So you've mentioned a little bit about college. Let's just dive in there, because I know that that's probably where the pivotal moments began.
Yeah. So I finished college 25 years ago, which is crazy to
Understood.
crazy. No, finished. Let me back up. I finished high school 25 years ago.
Got it.
So quarter of a century ago, this fall, I was a freshman on campus in Chapel Hill, and I felt like I had the world by the tail. I was 18 years old. I'd gotten into my first choice school. I was playing soccer. I was doing all of these things, and I really quickly, and what's funny, Robbie, is I think often, people who experience depression will tell you they don't really remember why it started or when it started.
Mm-hmm.
I think of being on a cliff and suddenly you lose your footing. And once you start to go, once you start to lose your balance, it's like you're scrabbling and crawling and you can't get that footing again, and you might not even remember why you fell in the first place. And all I can tell you quarter of a century later is all of a sudden, once super confident, accomplished 18-year-old kid, I was going to class in the morning and I was wearing sunglasses in class because I didn't want my classmates to see I was crying. Mm. And I wouldn't even know why I'd started crying. But that kind of became my life really quickly. I mean, this was a couple of weeks after I arrived on campus. It was September of 2000. And once I lost that footing initially and started, it was like I was in a free fall. And my grandparents, who I was real close to, my whole life lived just north of Raleigh, and they were both still working. But things had gotten so bad for me so quickly that they started making the drive from Wake Forest, just north of Raleigh, and they drive down to Chapel Hill on a random Tuesday night, take me out to dinner just to give me some respite, just to make sure I was still breathing, that I was still doing okay. And then there were nights that they felt like they didn't feel safe sending me back to my dorm. Oh, man. And so they drive me back to Wake Forest. I'd be, I'm a perfectionist, so I'd be sitting there on the couch with my laptop, tears rolling down my face, but I was writing a paper. I didn't want to turn it in late.
Still working.
My grandmother would be behind me making dinner, and then they drive me back to school the next morning. Yeah, I never missed a day of class. I made the dean's list that semester, but I was broken.
Golly.
And by October, gosh, it might have even been by September, I was up in Raleigh on the NC State campus talking to staff there about transferring, because I really wanted to come home to Charlotte. My mom said that wasn't an option. She wanted me to, whatever you want to call it, she wanted me to spread my wings. She wanted me to be independent, but being with my grandparents was the next best thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd put in a transfer application, I think probably by end of September, my freshman year.
Wow.
And I did transfer. I spent and a lot of people don't know this. I mean, it's not something that shows up on a resume. I mean, because
No.
the end of this part of the story is I did get my degree from Carolina, but I spent that spring semester at NC State and lived with my grandparents, and it was the best thing that it could have possibly happened to me.
Hmm.
I owe a lot to NC State. So, I'm not the Carolina fan who hates
fan.
who hates State, because I owe them a lot, a lot of ways.
Yeah.
They helped save my life. But I think the reason, Robbie, we even got on this thing that happened, gosh, so many years ago, and so many people in my life today don't even know happened, is it's shaped me, and it helped me see how far I could fall, and it made things that happened later on in life maybe not feel quite so bad. But then my sister, who was 2 years old that freshman year in college for me, then my sister was diagnosed with a fatal disease. And this was, fast forward 6 years. I was 2 years out of college. I had gone back to Chapel Hill. I'd graduated in the spring of '04, and I was planning a wedding. I had a great job. I bought a house just a couple of days shy of turning 24 years old. Again, a lot of similarities to fall of 2000. I felt like I was on top of the world. I felt like I'd conquered the universe. I had a great degree. I was getting married to my high school sweetheart. I was buying a house at a young age in my hometown. And I just felt lucky to be where I was. But I also knew that I worked for what I had. And we got married. John and I got married and went on a honeymoon and came home and woke up one morning and said, "We've been married a month. Happy 1 month anniversary. We've made it this far. We might as well keep going." And I drove into work that morning. I was working at one of the hospitals in town at the time in the marketing department. And I got a phone call about 10 o'clock in the morning from my mom. And she was crying so hard I could barely make out the words, but somehow I managed to figure out the spelling of the word she was telling me, and it was neuronal ceroid lipofuscinosis. It's the name of the disease. More common name is Batten disease, but I Googled it, and all I needed to see was a sentence before I was crying too. And there again, my life changed forever in that moment. And, Robbie, one of the things we were talking about before we started recording was this idea that, life is a one-way street. We don't get to go back and live any experience again. But life isn't linear in the sense that the experiences we have along that timeline don't shape us, don't continue to influence us for the rest of our lives. And so I like to think that, even though it was for very different reasons, a lot of the struggles that I had as an 18-year-old kid in college prepared me for what would be an even greater, more tragic struggle that my family was suddenly facing.
Yeah.
And I wanted to fix it.
Of course.
Of course
you did.
I wanted to fix it. There was, like I think almost anybody who gets devastating news like that, we get our moments of just grief and why her, why us, why me, and not knowing where to go from here. But it's pretty quickly, my mom and I especially sprang into action.
Yeah.
We didn't want to take no cure for an answer. And so here was another fork in the road.
Another challenge.
It was a challenge. I mean, when a doctor tells parents And I wasn't in the room for this, but I'm a parent now, and I can only imagine what this must have felt like for them. When they tell you that your perfect, beautiful 7-year-old daughter is going to die, and there's absolutely nothing they can do. You think about all of the incredible innovations that have happened in science and medicine over the many years, and sorry, there's nothing we can do. You need to take her home and love her and make happy memories.
God.
I mean, my son Jack is just a little bit younger than Taylor was that summer when they got that news. And I almost get shivers even thinking about it. Because when we become parents, that's not the script that we expect to live. I think we all know, at least in the back of our minds, that, parenthood's not going to be easy and that our kids are going to go through struggles, but nobody ever banks on something like Batten disease.
Oh.
And as close as I was to my parents' experience, I didn't experience it like they did.
Mm-hmm.
And becoming a mother taught me that.
Yeah. So there's a gentleman who I have become good friends with who was diagnosed with ALS. So similar in that there's this outcome that is expected, yet there's this challenge accepted, right? Mm-hmm. And I think and I've learned some of this through him, and I'm going to kind of apply this to our conversation, but I just spoke with him the other day. His name is Aaron Lazar, and he was just sharing with me a lot of the surrender that he's experienced lately. And I don't think that's him giving up or, that kind of thing. It's truly just, how do I function on a minute by minute basis if I keep fighting this somewhat inevitable thing?
Yeah.
There was the fight, there was the challenge, there was I'm going to beat this, I'm going to be the one or the one of a small number. And then there's the acceptance and surrender. And what he was sharing with me was a lot of the enlightenment, the joy, the life that he is experiencing now as a result of the surrender. And of course, now his mission is to go speak publicly and help people find ways to find that joy without having to go through what he's gone through. Mm-hmm. And so it made me think a lot about you and your experience. And in going back and listening to some of our previous conversation, there was this outside perspective of what you're going through and then what you're actually going through. And those can be two very different things. I mean, of course, there's the pain and the loss and the sadness and the grief and every horrific thing that you don't want to imagine that you're going through. But then there's this growth. And not to call it a silver lining, because you don't want to call it that when you lose someone you love. But like you said, these experiences in life make you who you are. And we look back, and as horrific and as traumatic as they can be, and you don't ever wish it upon anyone, but it created this beautiful person that you are.
A lot of that resonates with me, and it's funny, Robbie, I remember a moment in the parking deck of the hospital. I was working there, and this was not long after the diagnosis, and a coworker, very well-meaning, walked the car with me, and this was very early. It was like the week of the diagnosis, and she said, she's trying to help me find that silver lining, right? And she said, well, getting through this is going to, you get through this, you can get through anything. And I remember railing against that. I thought, frankly, if I have to go through something like this, if my sister has to suffer for me to become a better person, then I'd rather be an asshole. She doesn't need to suffer in order for me to gain.
Yeah.
But where I've softened a little bit over the years, that was a long time ago, is understanding that we can't choose what happens to us. And part of this too, for me, is, I spent my whole life being a control freak. part of that's the perfectionist personality. I wanted to control the universe. I wanted to be able to have complete control over every outcome connected to me. And Batten disease showed me that I don't have control over anything.
Right.
I mean, Taylor's destiny, my sister's destiny was picked out when she was conceived. Because that's a genetic disease with no cure. And so what I realized, it wasn't always easy. And there were days where it was harder to believe in this. But what I realized is we can't choose what happens to us, but we can choose what we do with that. And nobody taught me that better than Taylor, because Taylor was the one who was sick. And, when you're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, you don't totally understand the full depths of this devastating diagnosis and what your future or lack thereof is going to look like. But she knew she was sick. She knew she was different from other kids, and she certainly knew when she went blind. And all of a sudden she wakes up in the morning and opens her eyes and the world's still black. But Taylor railed against the idea that she should just sit back and take Batten disease. And she demanded of herself, that drive every day to get every ounce out of what life was willing to give her. And, she couldn't do it in the same way that all of her friends could who were healthy, but she went to school dances and danced with all the boys, and she participated in the school talent shows up on a raised stage when she couldn't see, and she ran 5Ks, and she learned Braille, and all of the things that you would think a kid that age, and certainly a lot of adults would sit back and say, this sucks. And I have every right to wallow in my misery and not do any of this stuff. And she could have done that, and I don't think anybody would have faulted her.
Yeah.
But watching how Taylor faced her illness, and certainly with a genetic disease, knowing how close I came to getting it, why did I get spared? It taught me a lot about, gave me perspective, and taught me a lot about what to do when, the universe deals us, throws us a curveball or deals us a bad card. And, we can cry and scream and complain and feel down on ourselves, and that's all okay. But then we need to get back up and we need to do something. And we can always, always, always do something.
Let's go into the area where we left off, because it's such a beautiful / sad thing, where those last days in the hospital and those first days in the hospital overlapped.
Yeah. So we celebrated Taylor's 20th birthday in August of 2018. My due date was September 24th. So I was pregnant with my first child, and, my husband will always say that the one thing that he tried for so many years to avoid, us becoming parents and my parents losing a child, he didn't want those things to coincide. And he felt like he tried for years to avoid that very thing happening. And then it happened anyway.
I mean, almost down to like...
It did. So Taylor, she was sick. I mean, it's silly to say she started to get really sick, but she took a nosedive not long after her birthday and ended up in the intensive care unit over at Atrium, whatever it's called now, Advocate Atrium. She was in the intensive care unit at the hospital, and she had just aged out of the children's hospital. And, so part of this new experience was we weren't in this bright, beautiful, welcoming, child-friendly space. We were in the adult ICU, and there was one hard wooden chair for visitors, and I was 9 months pregnant. But I'd go to work every day, and then I'd go over and visit Taylor, and she can't speak, she can't see, she's tube fed, but she was there. And I'd go over and visit her as much as I could. And I remember there were a lot of nights where my husband would come and relieve me and look at me and say, you need to go home. Because I was 9 months pregnant.
Wow.
And then on a Tuesday night in September, I'm sitting at my kitchen table at about 9 o'clock, and I know I'm going into labor. And at the exact time that I'm starting to feel those first pains, my sister is getting transported by ambulance to inpatient hospice at the hospital down the road, the hospital where I'm going to deliver. And so my husband's driving me to the hospital. The ambulance is driving Taylor to the same facility. And we arrive about 30 minutes apart.
Golly.
So Taylor's, I think it was the 3rd floor. I'm up on the 8th floor. And I worked at the hospital for 8 years. And I always remember thinking, there's so much sadness in a hospital. The only time you ever want to go to a hospital really is when you're bringing a new life into the world. And that's what I was there for. And I was scared out of my mind. It was a very strange time, and for my family. And I remember I was on the gurney, and they were wheeling me to the delivery room, and I'm saying, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can do this. And my husband says, we're doing this.
You're gonna have to.
And meanwhile, my sister is just 5 floors down.
Yeah.
With my parents, and so this was late on a Tuesday night. I will say, just to give a little timeline for people listening, my son Jack was born early Thursday morning. I was in labor for about 36 hours, and Taylor died 6 days later. So for that, roughly week, my family was together in the same building, under the same roof, for the most tragic and most wonderful thing at the same time. And so many of our friends and extended family, one of the first things they would say was how awful that those things would coincide, and that something like having a child would be, that it would be marred.
Yeah.
By the loss of,
overshadowed.
overshadowed. But oh my God, it was
better way to
it
have
was
it.
exactly the opposite.
Right.
Because Robbie, my parents, on the 3rd floor, they were losing a child, and then they could take the elevator 5 floors up, and they could hold their first grandchild. And I don't think they were in a place to realize it at the time, but Jack helped save their lives.
Mm.
And he certainly saved mine. I brought him home 4 days later, and she passed away 2 days later. And I remember we're having the memorial service the following week, and I'm sitting at my desk, and my son is about 5 days old, and he's in the little pack and play next to me, sleeping, and I'm writing a eulogy. And that was another one of those moments where, oh my God, how do I get here? How did I get here? How am I doing this?
Has anybody ever been here before?
But yeah, maybe not. But I had to be there. My newborn son needed me. He was completely dependent on me for everything, and in the best possible way, he helped me survive losing Taylor. And I think more than that, the long-term effect was he showed me that there was life after tragedy.
Mm.
And that was a lesson I had learned 5 years earlier when I ran a half marathon blindfolded for the first time. And that yet again was an experience. I went into it as a PR stunt, frankly. I wanted to get coverage for what we were trying to do with our nonprofit, but learning to run blind in a summer when Taylor her health really started to slide, and I was also struggling emotionally and mentally. That experience saved me. And one of the things that I talk about a lot in my book, Run to the Light, is that for the longest time, I believed that we could save Taylor's life, and then when reality set in and I knew we wouldn't, that was really hard to bear. But what I learned in learning to run blind that year was that you can still believe in something, even if believing doesn't mean exactly what you thought in the beginning.
Mm.
I think that terrible things can happen to us in life. And if we're willing to go in eyes wide open, there can be just amazing beauty after even, the most terrible, tragic things. You just have to be willing to look for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that opens up a lot of doors and just life kind of philosophies. It's a brutal world, and not just the human experience. Just look around. It's, a civilized society is one thing, and there's a lot of comfort there. Everything else is pretty brutal.
Yeah. Don't read the news today if you want to be happy.
Well, don't read the news and don't go out into the wilderness.
Yeah.
Right? It's brutal out there.
Yeah. But we can choose how to live in this. We can choose how to exist in this world, right?
Of course.
Outside forces are what they are. I can't change what's happening, on a global scale. I can't, control freak that I want to be. I can't change completely, what's happening in the rare disease landscape and that kids are still being born with Batten disease. I can't change the fact that, something may happen to me.
Mm-hmm.
Something may happen to my little boy. But I can wake up every day. I'm sitting here talking to you, and that means I was given another day.
Yeah.
And damn, that feels good.
Yeah.
But I could choose to focus on all of the bad. I could choose to focus on, a lot of things, but so much of this life is a choice.
Yeah.
And again, that goes back to what Taylor taught me. She only got 20 years, but she got the most joy out of that 20 years that she could have possibly squeezed. And I have bad days, and I've got, I have bad moments, and I have days that I'm pissed off at the world. And, most of the time I think I do a pretty good job, though, of living the way Taylor did.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for that, because we only get to do this once. I'm not old, but I'm not young, and for me, this has been a decade of thinking about my own mortality a lot.
Yeah.
And I know that, living every day like your last isn't realistic, and it's probably not even the smart thing to do, but we do have to live every day like it's a gift.
It's funny you bring that up. We're in the same kind of section in life. The midlife awakening, as
it's a good way to put it.
We need to call it. But yeah, mortality is real, and it's pretty fascinating. I think a little bit about, or in listening to you talk, my mind goes so many different places, so I have to try to narrow down. But I do think a lot about your experience in college, where you couldn't necessarily pinpoint what was creating this low feeling. And then there's something that occurs to you in your family where your sister gets ill, and it's very easy to pinpoint what's creating this low feeling. I wonder if and you already touched on this, but because there's internal and then there's things that happen to us, right? And sometimes we don't really know what's going on internally, and we can maybe find some reasoning and some causation later in life as you look back and say, oh, well, maybe it was this and that and this culmination of things that created that, and maybe. But you can look at a traumatic experience and say, it was that.
Absolutely.
And I often wonder, because I similarly have gone through some stuff, and a lot of it was internal. I've had external stuff too, but the internal stuff is I don't know, when you go through that and you come out on the other side, so to speak, it does make the next thing, as horrible as it is, you've got some tools.
Mm-hmm. You do. It's been a journey. It's been a journey. We could leave it at that.
Yeah.
It's been a journey.
Yeah.
But I think the if I were to boil down what the collection of experiences, both good and bad, has taught me, is to focus on the good. And that's not fancy language. That's nothing groundbreaking. I'm not the first person to say that, but it was a lesson that I obviously needed to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked so much about my experience in college, when I still today, quarter of a century later, can't really pinpoint exactly why I fell as far as I did, to somewhat later in life when I had a very good reason to be sad.
Right.
And somehow I handled that better. So, maybe I gained tools going through, major depression as a college freshman. I also think that my sister showed me the way.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't always do the right things when Taylor was battling Batten disease. It was, she lived for 12 years after her. It was 12 years? She died at 20, so it was 13 years from the time of diagnosis until we lost her. And there were a lot of times I didn't do the right thing during that part of the journey. I mean, I look back now, and it's another thing I talk about in my book. There are nights I wish I could have back where, I should have been over at my parents' house spending time with my sister who was dying, instead of, battling website issues on the computer. Because this was the late 2000s, early 2010s, when website technology wasn't exactly what it is now. And, I didn't walk into the fight knowing how to build a website and maintain a website, but I did it. And so I'd be up at 3 a.m. on having to go to work the next day. And here I am in my mid-20s, and I'm trying to figure out why our website's crashed, or why something's not appearing on the screen the way it should, and angsting over that, and pouring all of my available energy into those things.
Mm-hmm.
And then things like, if I don't keep up with the blog, or if I don't write the perfect blog post, or if I don't give a perfect speech at our next fundraiser, my sister's going to die. And I put that pressure on myself, and that's a lot of responsibility for anybody to shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
And for a long time, it energized me, and then all of a sudden it didn't. And when in that moment, or maybe collection of moments around the 2012, 2013 timeframe, when I finally understood that it was going to be too late for her. All of the progress we were making, that she still wasn't going to survive, that's when I crashed and burned. For, call it the second time in my life. And I went into a really deep, dark place.
Yeah. You've described yourself frequently as obsessive, controlling, hard-working, lots of self-expectation, and then you just get punched in the face.
Mm-hmm.
You hear that a lot. Life gives you what you need, not, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Not that you needed that,
Yeah.
but you know what I mean?
It's a stressful, those personality traits are, they can help you achieve great things,
Sure.
but they can also be really stressful.
Yeah.
It is not always a relaxing way to live.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like, post Taylor's passing, you still obviously are a hard worker and an achiever, and you want to do well. But from what I hear, you have a perspective on life that includes enjoyment and joy, not just achievement.
When I have to imagine, I'm not there yet, but I have to imagine that when we're in our final moments, if we're of sound mind to consider this, we're going to look back and appreciate the experiences that we had in life and the people that we lived them with more than any achievement on paper. And that's something that's still hard for me to get my head wrapped around because, Robbie, I still look at myself some days and think, well, you're 43 and you haven't written a bestseller yet, and you've done well in your career, but you could have done even more. And
She's still in there.
Yeah, she's still in there. I've run well over 100 races and close to 60 half marathons, but you've never run a full marathon.
No,
I'm still
what a
that
failure.
I'm still that person who will find every opportunity to pick out the thing I didn't do.
Sure.
Or the thing I could have done better.
Bring yourself down.
And this is where my son, who he and my sister passed each other coming and going. This is one of the great gifts that he's given me, is he's shown me, or reminded me rather, that there are seasons in life. There is a season for everything. And I haven't written a bestseller yet, but I work full time and I go pick up my son from school. And, there are a lot of days where I just rather sit and color with him, or talk to him about his day, or play basketball with him out in the driveway, then go get right back on my computer. And do that enough nights where, suddenly he's 15 and he doesn't want to play with me anymore. So I'm trying really hard. I have to, I'm far from perfect, and I have to remind myself frequently that, sometimes we have to let life come to us. Mm-hmm. And achievement isn't necessarily what it's all about. And I'm becoming more and more okay with what I have done, mm-hmm. and what I haven't. Mm-hmm. And we've done a lot.
You've done a lot.
Done a lot.
You've done a lot.
There are children who've been treated with gene therapy, because my mom and I drove up to Greensboro one night in 2012 and had dinner with the gene therapy expert, and said, we have this idea, and if we fund you, will you do this thing? And real children have been treated. It's, God, it's amazing, but it's still not enough. It's not enough. We don't have an FDA approved treatment. Well, but you have to start somewhere. Mm-hmm. I'm proud of what I've scratched out in 43 years on this planet. There's still a lot more I can do, but there's more to life than that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting about the, and I call it the deathbed perspective. How do you live life today in order to, in those last moments, have no regrets, be proud, be ready. Even if it were something horrific to happen and my life is cut short, will I still be proud and ready? Am I living today in preparation for that? And that's kind of how I attempt to live my life when I can remember to do so. But I do think we're all so complex and so different. Some people want to leave a work legacy. Some people want to leave a parenting legacy. Some people don't care about legacy and they just want to enjoy every moment. Who's to know?
I think one exercise that's worked for me is when it all gets to be a little bit too much and I start to lose focus, and the pendulum for me starts to shift or swing back too much in that direction of focusing on achievement, and things that I can't necessarily control, I find those moments where I need to to shift back, more in the middle and focus more on being happy and not having regrets. And I find myself thinking about those moments, and we all have these. Like, what is it that gives us the greatest sense of fulfillment?
Mm-hmm.
What are those experiences that you can think of when you just were so damn happy to be alive? And it's different for everybody.
It is.
And it's different for everybody. And for me, it's a collection of things, and some are really simple. Like, I have a coffee mug that was my grandmother's, and I was very close to my grandmother, and I just have memories of her drinking coffee in it at our beach house when I was growing up, and it's got a sand dollar on it. And so for me, it's as simple as sitting on my back porch on a Saturday morning when I don't have to do anything and drinking from that mug and reading a good book. 'Cause I love to read. But, it's also, I think when I feel most alive is when I'm standing in a canyon out west. I'm on a backcountry trail, and I just, this is going to get a little philosophical and a little out there, but, when I feel so grounded in the sense that, I understand my place in the physical world. And, it's almost like I see life in the universe just laid out like this roadmap in front of me, but I can go any direction I want. I love hiking out west. We bought land out west a couple of years ago, and, that's my happy place.
Oh.
But that's the kind of thing like that, and then the drinking coffee on the back porch in the morning, and when my son reaches up and wants to hold my hand when we walk across the parking lot. Those are the things that I think when I'm in my final moments will be most on my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Not, my college GPA, not the
There
highest.
might be a fleeting thought.
Yeah,
No.
not the highest title I ever achieved in my career. And those things are important.
Sure.
And, the harder we work and the more we achieve on paper, the more doors we unlock to have those experiences that fuel us for the rest of our lives. And I like to think beyond, but there has to be a balance. And I think that's probably one of the hardest parts of the human condition.
Finding the balance.
Is finding that balance. And that's not a groundbreaking statement, but it's something that's certainly been harder for me to live than to say out loud.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder sometimes to actually in practice do the things that you say.
Yeah.
And that is an ongoing journey.
No question.
Waking up every morning and say, I'm gonna strike that balance today.
Yeah, because it could be different every day. Everything's a little bit off.
That's right.
And you got to get it back, and it just takes different efforts and different focus in different places.
Yep.
That's it. I mean, that's, in order to live the way that we are discussing, that's the goal. That's the journey.
Yeah. And isn't it the only reason we're all here? I mean, it's, again, like if we take the life we lived, on our last day as what's the synopsis of your life? And isn't that all any of us really wants, if we get right down to it, is to be able to say that we lived, like we truly lived, and that we lived and we loved someone and we were happy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're all here trying to figure out what's going to make us happy.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's also an aspect of when you say lived, it doesn't always mean happiness. It just means live, like truly live. The people that can't seem to get through the heavy stuff or suppress it all and deny everything and just try to remain like in this life it has to be happy all the time. I don't know. That's kind of a disservice to living.
I think the things, I was never in love with the cliche, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, because sometimes things do kill us.
Sure.
Yes,
they do.
That is an unfortunate truth, and that's why I don't like that statement. But what I like to think about I'll use a metaphor. When we strength train and we lift weights, the way we build muscle mass is actually through lots of little micro tears
Mm-hmm.
in the muscle fibers. And by experiencing those little micro tears, or call it damage to the muscle fibers, it builds back up stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And in a similar way, the really difficult things that we go through in life, they might really hurt when we're experiencing them, and obviously some to greater degrees than others. But if we can get through to the other side and we can recognize what we learned and what we gained on that experience, then we're gonna come out stronger.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'd take my sister back in a heartbeat and give up everything I gained from that journey, but I can't get her back. And so the best thing I can do is try to squeeze the juice out of that journey.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not doing it right every day, but I'm at least doing the best I can.
Well, then that means you're doing it right. Well, let's talk about some of the feats that you've put on yourself and accomplished and attempted. Some of these physical things that I've heard a little bit about.
Some are a little crazy.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we want to hear.
Gosh, where do you want to start?
Well,
I
know you've done lots and lots of races, but let's go to the big one. Let's go to the attempt at the world record with not being able to see.
So, several years ago, I was sitting there one day and I started thinking, how I'd run 2 half marathons with a blindfold. I did one in 2013. I did it with a tether. It's the Charlotte Marathon. Then it was called something different, but it's in my hometown of Charlotte. And I trained for that for like 5 months. And that whole experience was a big part of what got me through watching Taylor get sicker at that time in her journey. And then 5 years later, I did it again. And this time, it wasn't the first time, but the stakes were different, because I was 5.5 weeks postpartum when this race was on the calendar. So yeah, in 2018, I ran the Charlotte Half Marathon blindfolded. My son was almost 6 weeks old. My sister had just died. 2 days before the race, my book was released. There were a lot of things happening. I mean, one of the craziest things I tell people now was I spent about 8 or 9 hours at the race expo that day before the race. And any mother who has ever pumped or breastfed will understand what I say when had a really hard time that weekend because I didn't pump for like 9 hours. I don't know if you want to put that in there, but that was to talk about the juxtaposition of all of the things happening in my life right then. I had a newborn at home, and I had a book launch, and I was doing this crazy race. For people who care about this sort of thing, my friend Andrew Swistak, who's always been my guide, and I crossed the finish line in 2 hours and 3 minutes in that race. And my mom was at the finish line. My baby boy was at the finish line. I had always, in the first one, I'd always wanted Taylor to be the first person I hugged when I crossed, and she was too sick to come. Well, in the second one, she was up watching over us and had my son. Fast forward another 5 years, and I'm restless because I always got to have some ridiculous goal. So at this point, I'm having major ankle surgery. I played soccer for 25 years and destroyed my ankles, and so I had major reconstructive ankle surgery in January of 22. But why not? I'm going to come back and I'm going to try to break a world record. So I said, surely there's somebody who's tried to do this for time, and nobody has. It's crazy. But there was a beginning standard, and if I could run a half marathon blindfolded without a tether, operating on verbal instruction alone in an hour and 55 minutes, then I would have a world record.
Okay.
It's like, well, hell yeah, let's do this.
Yeah.
So I asked my friend Andrew if he would do this with me again, and we picked a race, and it was going to be the Kiowa Half Marathon in December of 2023. I'd be less than 2 years removed from a total ankle reconstruction, and I'd be in my early 40s. But why not?
I mean, what better time?
So there's always that happy medium. I feel like I thrive under pressure. I've always thrived under pressure. I've always done really well when I've had a goal to strive for. Sometimes the goals are unrealistic and crazy, and so I have to be prepared for what happens if I fail.
Mm-hmm.
And to fast forward to the end of that race, it was a lot tougher than we had expected, and not for the reasons you would normally think. Kiowa is a really fast course. A lot of people run that race because they want to qualify for Boston.
Is that because it's flat?
It's flat.
Yeah.
It's flat. But here's where, again, my sister pops back in to remind me that you have different challenges when you're blind. And so while a flat course should be fast, it's not if it's narrow, if there are a lot of 90-degree turns, if you have to navigate golf cart paths as part of the course. And that's exactly what I had to do. And I didn't have a tether. I was trying to run an 8-something per minute mile for 13.1 miles without being able to see, operating on verbal instruction alone. It was crazy. It was crazy, and it was so dangerous. I mean, here I am. I think this ankle cost about $100,000. I have an implant in there, and I go out and do this dangerous thing. And, Taylor's inspired me to do some crazy things, and not only because she had no fear, but there are times I go into things and I have this almost illogical sense of belief that I'm going to be okay. And somehow, I mean, if you look at pictures of me from the starting line that day, you can see that I'm nervous. Anxious might be a better word. I knew that what I was doing was really dangerous, but I'd do it 1,000 times again. And just so everybody knows too, we missed the standard by 2 minutes. So I ran the race that day in an hour and 57 minutes. So I do not have a world record. But I also know that I did something that nobody else on this planet has ever done. And I feel pretty good about that.
And tell me why you don't have the world record?
So nobody's ever attempted to run a half marathon blindfolded without a tether, at least that's been recorded. So when there's a record to break and nobody has ever attempted it, they set a kind of a beginning standard, and they set it at 1:55. So I knew.
So you hold the record.
I've done it faster than anybody else, right? So in my mind, I have a world record.
You hold the record.
I just don't have
nobody else does.
I don't have a silly plaque from Guinness World Records.
All I know is there's nobody that's done it faster.
I did something really freaking hard on that course, and it taught me so. I mean, we could do a whole separate episode about the concept of trust. Blind trust and blind faith, and what my friend meant to me. His only job was to keep me safe, but that yet again on this one-way journey of life, that was yet another experience that taught me a lot. And where my son was a newborn at the race in 2018, right after Taylor died, he was old enough to comprehend what was going on. In 2023, he was 5 years old, and we worked it out with the race director for him to be in the finish line area. And before I even took off my blindfold, I felt him putting the medal around my neck. And that more, I could give a damn about any world record, considering I had that experience. I can't even describe it. I mean, all of the emotions. I knew I hadn't gotten the time. So there was just this sheer disappointment, and what if I had done this? If I had done this a little bit better? If I had pushed myself harder at mile 10? All of those things, those feelings of self-doubt were coursing through me. But then when I knew it was him, and I knelt down, and I felt his hands kind of brush the top of my head as he tried to get that medal over my neck, and then he put his arms around me. And I thought, this is what it's all about. And, we were talking about the difference between experiences and achievements a little earlier, and that's an experience that nobody can take away from me or from him. And so, yeah, do I believe in silver linings? Not at the expense of a human life. There is nothing in this life or nothing you could tell me that would make me think that Taylor's life was a worthy sacrifice.
Yeah.
I'd have her back here in a heartbeat. But I can't change the fact that she's gone. And I'm going to soak up all of the good that comes out of a really bad situation. And that moment was one of them. And he's 6. He was 5 at the time. But I hope that at least in a small sense, one thing my son took from that moment is that we can do hard things. We can do things that nobody else thinks we should be able to do. And I hope he carries with him for the rest of his life, too.
I bet he will. Wow. Oh, Laura. Man, oh, man. Where to go now?
I don't know, because I've been all over the place.
That's all right. This is exactly why we got back together. I think you've given not only me, but anyone listening, everything that we wanted to hear. It's full of inspiration and enlightenment and wisdom and guidance. It's been beautiful. So I think we can probably wrap it. I think just as a mandatory thing or a necessary thing, let's talk about your book. Let's talk about, I assume there's a nonprofit, and is there something that you've created that you would like to share that's around Batten disease and that kind of stuff?
Oh, gosh. As a marketer, I always say, don't give people too many calls to action. There are a lot of things that, there are a lot of things I hope people take from this and go do. But thinking back to all of the things that we've talked about and the stories that we've discussed, Robbie, the first thing I hope people do is pick up my book.
Run to the Light.
Run to the Light. It's a 70,000 word love letter to my little sister. It's also, I hope, proof to anybody that they can do hard things, that they're gonna face really terrible things in their own life. Might not be Batten disease, might be something else, might be a job loss, it might be another devastating illness or divorce or whatever hard thing you might be going through. I hope that story is proof that you're stronger than you think you are. And it's not really a book about running. It is, but it's not. Read the book.
Yeah.
And, then I also hope people, hopefully they've had it, it's opened them up. We haven't talked a lot about numbers, but I hope this conversation has opened them up to a different perspective on rare diseases and the impact that they have. And, we're not as Taylor's Tale, the charity that we founded not long after Taylor was diagnosed, is not, maybe as visible certainly in Charlotte as it used to be, but we're still doing really important work behind the scenes. And check us out, learn a little bit about what we do.
Taylor's Tale.
Taylor's Tale. And there's a movie coming out. There's a documentary film. It's called Blind Momentum. You can go to blindmomentum.com, and we're officially in post-production. Wow. So it's the story of the world record attempt, and certainly everything leading up to it. But more than that, it's the why.
Yeah.
And every story has a why. The most ingenious plot doesn't stick without a really powerful why. And maybe you haven't attempted something crazy like that. You probably haven't, but I hope that you'll see some of yourself in my journey.
Love it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the conversation.
Laura King Edwards, the world record holder.
Unofficial.
Unofficial. If there's a list of anybody to beat, it's you. It's not someone else. All right. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Absolutely wonderful. I really appreciate your time and your vulnerability and your wisdom.